Captain Elena Vasquez was court-martialed on Monday. By Thursday, she was stripped of her rank and banned from all military facilities. No ceremony, no explanation, just security guards escorting her through the gates of Fort Ravenwood while her former colleagues watched in stunned silence. 3 days earlier, her impossible 2,847-meter shot had saved 300 Marines from certain death in the mountains of Khardistan. But something happened after the mission debrief that powerful men needed buried along with her military career. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Then the classified footage leaked, and suddenly those same Pentagon officials weren't just silent, they were terrified. Elena had been the most rejected sniper candidate in military history. 12 times she had applied for elite sniper training. 12 times the review board had stamped "denied" across her application. Too small, they said. Not strong enough for the equipment. Women lacked the mental fortitude for precision killing. The psychological pressure would break her. For 7 years, she endured the rejections while excelling in every other aspect of military service. She broke marksmanship records that had stood for decades. Her scores in tactical assessments surpassed those of decorated veterans. Her psychological evaluations showed unshakable mental resilience. Yet every 6 months, when the sniper program opened for new candidates, Elena Vasquez received the same form letter. "Thank you for your interest. Unfortunately, you do not meet the current requirements for advanced marksman training." The rejection letters came from Colonel Harrison Caldwell, head of the elite marksman division at Fort Ravenwood. Caldwell was old-school military, a man who believed certain roles were reserved for certain types of soldiers. In his 23 years overseeing sniper training, he had never accepted a female candidate. His reasoning was simple. Snipers operated alone, often for days, in the most hostile environments imaginable. The lives of entire units depended on their ability to remain calm under impossible pressure. Women, in his professional opinion, were a liability the military couldn't afford. Elena's commanding officers tried to intervene. Captain Rodriguez from her reconnaissance unit submitted glowing recommendations. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes from tactical training personally vouched for her abilities. Even General Patricia Steinberg, one of the few female flag officers at Fort Ravenwood, put in a word. Nothing worked. Caldwell's decision was final, and his authority over sniper selection was absolute. But Elena refused to give up. Every rejection only strengthened her resolve. She began training independently, using her off-duty time to perfect skills the military wouldn't teach her. She studied wind patterns, atmospheric pressure, and ballistic calculations with the obsession of a doctoral candidate. She practiced meditation techniques to control her heart rate and breathing. She pushed her physical conditioning beyond the standards required for special forces. Her unofficial mentor became Master Sergeant Jake Thornton, a legendary sniper who had served 3 tours in Kandahar before taking a training position at Fort Ravenwood. Thornton had watched Elena's repeated rejections with growing frustration. He knew talent when he saw it, and Elena possessed something that couldn't be taught, an almost supernatural ability to remain absolutely still for hours while maintaining perfect situational awareness. "Politics," Thornton would mutter after each rejection board meeting. "They're letting politics override common sense." In her 7th year of rejections, Elena submitted her application for the 13th time. She was 31 years old, approaching the unofficial age limit for beginning sniper training. If this attempt failed, her window would close forever. The review board, led by Colonel Caldwell, barely glanced at her file before reaching their decision. "Captain Vasquez," Caldwell announced in his characteristic monotone, "the board appreciates your persistence, but our position remains unchanged." Elite marksman roles require specific physical and psychological characteristics that, Sir, Elena interrupted, something she had never done in 12 previous hearings. I'm not asking for special consideration. I'm asking for the same opportunity to prove myself that you give every male candidate. Caldwell's face darkened. Captain, you're out of line. With respect, sir, the only thing out of line is denying someone a chance based on gender rather than ability. The room fell silent. Elena had crossed a line, but she no longer cared about protocol. 7 years of watching less qualified candidates advance while she remained stuck had pushed her past the point of careful diplomacy. Your application is denied, Caldwell said coldly. Furthermore, I'm recommending you for reassignment. Clearly, Fort Ravenwood is not the right fit for your ... ambitions. Elena left the hearing knowing it was over. Not just the sniper program, but likely her entire military career. Speaking truth to power came with consequences, and she had just signed her own transfer orders to some remote outpost where troublesome. Officers were sent to fade away. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Intelligence reports indicated a massive Taliban offensive building in the Khardistan mountains. A forward operating base called Camp Valkyrie, manned by 300 Marines, found itself surrounded and cut off from reinforcement. The enemy had positioned heavy artillery on the surrounding peaks, making helicopter extraction impossible. Supply lines were severed. The Marines were trapped with limited ammunition and no air support. The only chance for rescue lay in neutralizing the enemy artillery positions, but they were positioned on mountain peaks over 2 miles away, beyond the range of any weapon system the trapped Marines possessed. A precision strike from an elite sniper might work, but it would require shooting at distances that pushed the absolute limits of human capability. Colonel Caldwell assembled his best marksmen for a briefing at 0600 hours. Present were his top 5 snipers, each with multiple confirmed kills and years of experience in mountain warfare. As Caldwell outlined the mission parameters, the grim reality became clear. This shot was beyond anything they had attempted. Sir, spoke Staff Sergeant Mitchell, Caldwell's most experienced sniper, we're talking about a 2,800-meter shot in mountain conditions. Wind, elevation, moving targets, the probability of success is maybe 15%. 15% isn't good enough, Caldwell replied. 300 Marines are counting on us. Master Sergeant Thornton, who had been silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke up. Sir, there is one other option. Caldwell turned to him. With raised eyebrows, Captain Vasquez, sir. She's been training for this exact scenario for 7 years. Her theoretical knowledge of extreme-range shooting exceeds anyone in this room. Absolutely not, Caldwell snapped. This is not the time for social experiments. With respect, sir, Thornton continued, this isn't about politics, it's about capability. And right now, she might be our best shot at bringing those Marines home. The room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs. Everyone present knew Elena's reputation, both for her marksmanship scores and her repeated rejections. The irony was impossible to ignore. The woman deemed unfit for sniper training might be the only person capable of pulling off an impossible shot. Caldwell stared at the mission parameters, calculating odds and weighing options. 300 lives hung in the balance. His personal convictions were at war with military necessity. In the distance, the sound of helicopters filled the air as medical teams prepared for what might become the largest casualty evacuation in recent memory. The clock was ticking, and for the first time in his career, Colonel Harrison Caldwell was about to make a decision that would change everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you've ever been told you weren't good enough, that you didn't have what it takes, or that your dreams were impossible, this story is for you. Captain Elena Vasquez's journey from rejected outcast to the woman who pulled off the most impossible shot in military history proves that sometimes the people who doubt us the most are the ones who need us the most. If you believe in stories where persistence conquers prejudice, where talent eventually triumphs over politics, and where one person's courage can save hundreds of lives, then you're going to love what we share on this channel. We bring you real stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things when the world counted them out. Consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell, because every week we dive deep into stories like Elena's stories that remind us why we should never give up on ourselves, even when everyone else already has. These aren't just feel-good tales. They're blueprints for overcoming the impossible obstacles in your own life. Today's story will show you exactly how Elena Vasquez turned 7 years of rejection into the moment that changed military history forever. But more importantly, it will show you the mindset, the preparation, and the unwavering determination that allowed her to succeed when failure meant 300 Marines would never come home. Because here's what the rejection letters never told Elena, and what your doubters will never tell you. Sometimes being underestimated is your greatest advantage. Sometimes the very qualities that make others dismiss you are exactly what you need to achieve the impossible. So grab a coffee, settle in, and let me tell you about the woman who proved that the 13th time really can be the charm, and how one perfect shot at 2,847 meters didn't just save 300 lives, it shattered every assumption about what's possible when you refuse to quit. The mission had been a complete success. Elena's impossible shot had neutralized the enemy artillery position, allowing the rescue helicopters to extract all 300 Marines from Camp Valkyrie without a single casualty. The precision required had been beyond anything in the military record. Books a 2,847-meter kill shot in mountain conditions with crosswinds exceeding 15 miles per hour. Ballistics experts would later call it physically impossible, yet helmet camera footage from the rescue team showed the Taliban gunner collapsing at the exact moment Elena squeezed the trigger. For exactly 72 hours, Elena Vasquez was the most celebrated soldier at Fort Ravenwood. General Patricia Steinberg personally congratulated her in front of the assembled base personnel. The rescue footage played on every television in the mess hall. Colonel Caldwell, who had blocked her sniper applications for 7 years, was forced to shake her hand during the award ceremony, his jaw clenched so tightly that veins bulged along his temples. But now, just 3 days later, Elena sat in the sterile conference room of the Judge Advocate General's office, her uniform stripped of the marksmanship ribbons she had earned over 8 years of service. The Medal of Valor that General Steinberg had pinned to her chest on Tuesday had been removed Wednesday night by military police who entered her quarters without explanation. Even her unit patches had been confiscated, leaving her uniform looking barren and anonymous. The windowless room smelled of industrial disinfectant and fear. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everyone look either guilty or dead. Elena had been waiting for 6 hours without food, water, or any explanation of why she was there. Through the reinforced glass window in the door, she could see officers passing by. People who had congratulated her days earlier now refused to make eye contact. At 13:47 hours, the door finally opened. Colonel Caldwell entered flanked by 2 Judge Advocate General officers and a man in civilian clothing whose expensive suit and government haircut screamed Pentagon intelligence. None of them offered greetings or explanations. They simply took their seats across from Elena as if she were a hostile witness rather than the woman who had saved 300 American lives 3 days earlier. Captain Vasquez, Colonel Caldwell began, his voice carrying none of the forced respect he had shown during the ceremony. You are hereby charged under Article 86 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice absence without leave during a combat. Operation. Elena's training kept her face neutral, but inside her mind reeled. Sir, I was ordered to take the shot by Master Sergeant Thornton under emergency combat authorization. Master Sergeant Thornton had no authority to deploy a non-qualified sniper in a combat zone, one of the JAG officers interjected. You were not certified for the weapon system you used, nor were you authorized to be in the forward observation post. Sir, 300 Marines were about to die. The qualified snipers assessed the shot as impossible. The qualified snipers followed proper protocol. Caldwell cut her off. You violated the chain of command, used equipment you were not certified to operate, and placed yourself in an unauthorized combat position. The man in the civilian suit leaned forward, his pale blue eyes studying Elena like she was a specimen. Under a microscope. Captain, did you record any footage of your activities during the mission? Elena hesitated. She had been wearing a standard helmet camera, as was protocol for all forward observers. Standard documentation equipment, sir. We'll need all devices, storage media, and any copies you may have made. Sir, that would be evidence of the successful mission. That would be classified material that you accessed without proper authorization, the civilian said sharply. Failure to surrender it immediately constitutes a violation of the Espionage Act. The room fell silent except for the mechanical hum of the air conditioning system. Elena realized she was witnessing something far beyond military discipline. This was a systematic erasure of what had happened in the mountains of Khardistan. They weren't just charging her with protocol violations, they were making the mission itself disappear. Furthermore, Colonel Caldwell continued, consulting a Manila folder. You are being transferred effective immediately to Administrative Services, Logistics Division, Fort Bitterman, Alaska. Your rank is reduced to First Lieutenant, and your security clearance is revoked pending investigation. Fort Bitterman was military purgatory, a supply depot in the Aleutian Islands, where problematic officers were sent to process requisition forms until they accepted early retirement. The message was clear: accept the humiliation quietly or face worse consequences. On what grounds? Elena asked, her voice steady despite the surreal nature of the proceedings. Conduct unbecoming an officer, violation of operational protocols, and unauthorized use of military assets, Caldwell recited mechanically. The specifics are classified above your current clearance level. Elena studied the faces around the table. These weren't the expressions of military officers enforcing discipline. Colonel Caldwell looked uncomfortable, almost sick. The JAG officers kept checking their watches as if they wanted this over quickly. Only the civilian seemed at ease, watching Elena with the cold calculation of a chess player contemplating his next move. Sir, I saved 300 American servicemen. The mission was a complete success with 0 casualties. The mission parameters you operated under were not authorized, the civilian replied smoothly. Any actions taken outside authorized channels are considered rogue operations, regardless of outcome. Master Sergeant Thornton had warned Elena this might happen. In the hours after the rescue, he had pulled her aside with urgent whispers. They're going to try to bury this. Too many people bet against you for too long. Success like yours makes powerful people look stupid, and stupid people powerful. Positions are dangerous. She hadn't believed him then. The rescue had been too public, too successful, too clearly heroic for anyone to spin it negatively. But sitting in this sterile room, watching her career being systematically dismantled by men who had never fired a shot in anger, Elena understood the brutal mathematics of military politics. Her success had made Colonel Caldwell look incompetent. For rejecting her 13 times, it had embarrassed every qualified sniper who had declared the shot impossible. It had challenged the fundamental assumptions about women in combat roles that had shaped careers and justified decades of discrimination. You Have 24 hours to clear your quarters and report to the transportation office," Caldwell announced, standing abruptly. "Your personal effects will be searched before departure. Any military property found in your possession will result in additional charges." As the officers filed out, leaving Elena alone in the conference room, she noticed the civilian lingering by the door. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "Captain Vasquez, you're a talented soldier. This situation is unfortunate, but there are larger considerations at play here. Ones that go beyond individual recognition or career advancement. Larger than 300 Marines coming home alive?" His smile was thin and entirely without warmth. "Much larger. I suggest you accept your new assignment gracefully. Alaska can be very peaceful for people who appreciate solitude and discretion." After he left, Elena sat alone in the humming, fluorescent wasteland of the conference room, staring at her reflection in the black surface of the table. 3 days ago, she had been a hero. Now she was a problem to be solved, a loose end to be tied off, a story to be rewritten. Through the window, she could see the flag of Fort Ravenwood snapping in the afternoon wind, the same flag that had flown over her medal ceremony 72 hours earlier. Nothing had changed except the narrative, but in the military, narrative was everything. Elena Vasquez, the woman who had made the impossible shot, was about to disappear into the bureaucratic machinery that processed inconvenient truths. But as she sat in that sterile room, a new kind of determination began to crystallize. They could take her rank, her ribbons, and her assignments. They could ship her to Alaska and bury her in paperwork. But they couldn't change what had happened in those mountains, and they couldn't erase the truth that 300 Marines were alive because she had refused to accept the word impossible. The real battle, Elena realized, was just beginning. The charges made no sense, and everyone in that room knew it. Elena sat through the second day of proceedings, listening to military lawyers construct a case that would have been laughable if it weren't destroying her career. According to the official narrative being crafted, she had somehow abandoned her post, stolen military equipment, and conducted an unauthorized operation, all while simultaneously saving 300 Marines in full view of dozens of witnesses. Captain Vasquez, Major Williams from the JAG office read from a prepared statement. "On the morning of September 15th, you left your assigned position in the communications center without permission from your commanding officer." Elena's jaw tightened. "Sir, I was ordered to the forward observation post by Master Sergeant Thornton under Combat Emergency Protocol 7 Alpha. There is no record of such an order being issued. Because emergency protocols require written authorization during active combat, sir. This is basic military procedure." Major Williams shuffled his papers nervously. Elena could see the sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Nevertheless, you were not authorized to access the M24 sniper weapon system." "Sir, I've been qualified on the M24 since 2019. My certification is in my personnel file." "Your certification expired in April. You failed to complete required recertification." "Training." Elena stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, I applied for recertification training 13 times. Colonel Caldwell denied every application." "That's irrelevant to this proceeding," Colonel Caldwell interjected sharply. "You used a weapon system without current certification. That's a clear violation regardless of the circumstances." The circular logic was maddening. They had blocked her from getting certified, then charged her for using equipment without certification during an emergency. It was like being arrested for not having a driver's license after being repeatedly denied the test. The civilian in the expensive suit, who had introduced himself only as Mr. Davidson, leaned forward with a thin smile. "Captain, you mentioned filming the operation. We've reviewed the helmet camera footage from your device." Elena waited for him to continue, but he simply stared at her as if she should respond to a question he hadn't asked. And she finally prompted, "Interesting. The timestamp on your footage shows a 2-hour gap during the critical phase of the operation. Technical malfunction?" Elena's blood ran cold. She had worn that camera for the entire mission. There had been no malfunction, no gap in recording. The footage would have shown everything: her receiving orders from Master Sergeant Thornton, the successful shot sequence, the immediate rescue coordination. That footage was proof of her authorization and competence. "Sir, there was no malfunction. The camera recorded continuously for the entire operation." Davidson's smile widened. "According to our technical analysis, there was significant electromagnetic interference in the area. Very unfortunate. Makes it impossible to verify your version of events." Elena realized she was watching evidence being manufactured in real time. The very footage that would exonerate her was being edited to create gaps, discrepancies, anything that could support their predetermined conclusion. "Sir, other personnel were present during the operation. Master Sergeant Thornton can verify. Master Sergeant Thornton suffered a severe concussion during the Taliban mortar attack." Colonel Caldwell interrupted. "His memory of the events is unreliable. Medical discharge has been recommended." Another convenient elimination of a witness. Elena felt the walls closing in as the conspiracy revealed its scope. They weren't just targeting her. They were systematically removing anyone who could corroborate the truth. What about the Marines who were rescued? They saw the mission succeed. They can testify too. The rescued personnel are being debriefed at a classified location, Davidson said smoothly. Their testimony, if any, will be evaluated through proper intelligence channels. Translation: the witnesses were being isolated and their stories controlled. Elena began to understand the true scale of what she was facing. This wasn't a military disciplinary action. It was a professional intelligence operation designed rewrite history. "Captain," Major Williams continued reading from his script, "you also violated operational security by discussing classified mission parameters with unauthorized personnel." "What unauthorized personnel?" "Your conversations with Sergeant Rodriguez in the mess hall on September 12th were recorded by base security." Elena remembered that conversation. Rodriguez had asked how she felt about finally getting a chance to prove herself in the sniper program. She had mentioned being excited about upcoming training opportunities. Somehow, that casual chat was being twisted into a security violation. "Sir, I discussed general training schedules with a fellow soldier. Nothing classified was mentioned." "You revealed your knowledge of pending operations to someone without appropriate clearance," Davidson said. "Operational security violations are taken very seriously." Every normal military interaction was being weaponized against her. Every casual conversation, every routine procedure, every standard protocol was being reframed as evidence of misconduct. Elena realized they had been building this case for months, possibly since her first application to sniper training. Colonel Caldwell cleared his throat. "Captain Vasquez, given the severity of these charges, we're prepared to offer you a deal." Elena's eyes narrowed. In 7 years of military service, she had never heard of plea bargains and disciplinary proceedings. "Accept voluntary discharge with no admission of wrongdoing. Your service record will reflect an honorable completion of duty. No criminal charges will be filed. And if I refuse?" Davidson's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Court-martial for violation of the Espionage Act. Treason charges are possible, given your unauthorized access to classified operational data." Treason. They were threatening to charge her with treason for saving 300 American servicemen. Elena felt a laugh building in her chest, the kind of hysteria that comes from witnessing something so absurd it breaks your ability to process reality normally. "Sir, I took one shot to save American lives. How is that treason?" Because, Davidson said patiently, as if explaining to a child, you obtained classified intelligence through unauthorized channels, used that intelligence to conduct an unauthorized operation, and documented classified tactical procedures without proper clearance. In legal terms, your intentions are irrelevant. Your actions fit the statutory definition of espionage. Elena stared at the three men across from her. Colonel Caldwell looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Major Williams kept checking his watch and avoiding eye contact. Only Davidson seemed comfortable with the proceedings, like a man who had destroyed careers before and would do so again. I need time to consider the offer, Elena said finally. You have until 0800 tomorrow, Caldwell replied. After that, the offer expires and we proceed with formal charges. As the session ended, Elena remained seated while the others filed out. Davidson lingered, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate precision. Captain, you seem like an intelligent woman. I'm sure you understand that some battles can't be won through conventional means. What's that supposed to mean? It means that sometimes the most heroic thing a soldier can do is accept defeat gracefully, for the greater good. After he left, Elena sat alone in the conference room, staring at her reflection in the polished table surface. The woman looking back at her wore the uniform of the United States Army, but the system that uniform represented had just threatened to destroy her, for exemplifying its highest values. 20-4 hours to decide between voluntary exile or complete annihilation. 24 hours to choose between keeping her freedom and keeping her integrity. But as Elena sat in that sterile room, listening to the mechanical hum of the ventilation system, she realized there was a third option that none of them had considered. She could fight back. The question wasn't whether she would accept their deal. The question was whether they had made a fatal mistake by underestimating the woman who had made an impossible shot when 300 lives depended on it. Elena Vasquez had spent 7 years learning that the word impossible was just another obstacle to overcome. Tomorrow she would show them exactly what that lesson had taught her. Fort Bitterman, Alaska existed for one purpose: to break the spirits of soldiers who had become inconvenient to the military establishment. Located on a wind-scoured island in the Aleutian chain, the base processed supply requisitions for remote outposts across the Pacific. The work was mind-numbing, the weather was brutal, and the isolation was absolute. It was where careers went to die slowly, one meaningless form at a time. Elena's new office was a converted storage closet in the basement of Building C, wedged between the heating pipes and a maintenance supply room. Her desk, a metal table salvaged from the 1970s, sat beneath flickering fluorescent lights that hummed with electrical problems. The air smelled of mildew, industrial solvent, and the dreams of soldiers who had given up hope. Her job title was Logistics Coordination Specialist, which translated to processing paperwork for toilet paper shipments to weather stations in the middle of nowhere. 8 hours a day, she reviewed requisition forms, checked inventory numbers, and stamped approvals for supplies that would sit in warehouses until they expired. It was work that could be done by a computer program, but the military preferred to use it as psychological warfare against troublesome personnel. The other exiles at Fort Bitterman recognized Elena immediately. News of her case had spread through the military grapevine with the speed of all good scandals. Some avoided her entirely, afraid that association might somehow contaminate their own chances of eventual transfer. Others offered knowing nods of solidarity, fellow victims of the system's capacity for destroying anyone who became inconvenient. First Lieutenant Vasquez, Sergeant Major Patterson had announced during her orientation, deliberately using her reduced rank. Welcome to Fort Bitterman. You'll find that soldiers who follow orders and keep their mouths shut tend to have pleasant tours here. Those who don't. He had let the sentence hang in the frigid air like a threat. The isolation was designed to be complete. Elena's security clearance had been revoked. cutting her off from any meaningful work. Her access to military communications was restricted to basic administrative channels. Even her personal internet access was monitored and filtered. The message was clear. She had been severed from the military community and left to slowly fade into irrelevance. The psychological pressure was relentless. Every morning, Elena walked through hallways where her former colleagues' achievements were displayed on walls of honor. Promotion announcements, commendations, successful mission reports, all reminders of the career trajectory she had been ejected from. Her own Medal of Valor, which should have been featured prominently, had been quietly removed from all displays. It was as if her heroic act in Khardistan had never happened. Meals in the mess hall were exercises in social isolation. Elena sat alone while conversations died when she approached tables. The few soldiers who attempted to engage were quickly warned off by others who understood the unspoken rules of Fort Bitterman. Association with the disgraced could be dangerous to one's own survival. The rumors followed her everywhere, each more damaging than the last. She went rogue in the field, disobeyed direct orders, mental breakdown under pressure. Security. Risk. The truth that she had saved 300 Marines with an impossible shot was systematically erased and replaced with a narrative of instability and insubordination. Elena's personal life suffered equally devastating attacks. Her military housing had been revoked, forcing her to rent a drafty apartment in the civilian town of Glacier Bay, population 847. The locals, dependent on the military base for their economic survival, treated her with the same suspicion they reserved for other unwelcome elements. Her bank accounts had been frozen during the investigation, leaving her dependent on emergency loans to pay rent and buy groceries. Even worse were the professional consequences rippling outward from her case. Elena learned through carefully worded emails that other female soldiers who had supported her sniper applications were facing their own sudden scrutiny. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, who had written a recommendation letter, was passed over for promotion despite exemplary performance. Captain Diana Foster, who had publicly congratulated Elena after the rescue, was transferred to a recruiting station in rural Montana. The message was unmistakable. Supporting Elena Vasquez was career suicide. The military establishment was demonstrating its power to destroy not just the primary target, but anyone foolish enough to stand with her. Master Sergeant Thornton's fate was particularly cruel. His medical discharge had been processed with unusual speed, cutting off his pension just 3 years before retirement eligibility. Elena received a brief, coded message through unofficial channels. They're claiming I have traumatic brain injury from the mortar attack. Can't remember what happened during the mission. Convenient diagnosis. Watch yourself. The systematic dismantling of Elena's support network was surgical in its precision. Every witness, every ally, every person who could corroborate her version of events was being neutralized through transfers, medical discharges, or career-threatening investigations. The 300 Marines she had saved remained sequestered in classified debriefings, their testimony locked behind walls of national security classification. Elena's attempts to contact military legal aid were stonewalled. Her requests for copies of her own service records were denied on security grounds. Even basic administrative requests disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. She was being systematically cut off from every resource and relationship that might allow her to mount a defense. Surveillance was constant but subtle. Elena noticed the same vehicles parked outside her apartment at different times of day. Her phone calls had an odd echo that suggested monitoring. Her internet searches were logged and restricted. Even her mail delivery became irregular, with several letters from supporters mysteriously going missing. The psychological toll was exactly what they had calculated. Elena found herself second-guessing every interaction, every conversation, every decision. The paranoia was rational. She really was being watched, really was being systematically isolated. but that knowledge only made it worse. How do you maintain sanity when your justified fears make you sound crazy? Sleep became elusive. Elena would lie awake listening to the howling Aleutian wind, her mind replaying the events in Khardistan. Had she really saved 300 Marines? Had the impossible shot really happened? When every official record, every witness, every piece of evidence was being erased or discredited, even her own memories began to feel unreliable. The weather at Fort Bitterman seemed designed to reinforce the psychological pressure. Endless rain, bone-chilling fog, and winds that could knock a person off their feet. The sun was a rare visitor, appearing briefly through gaps in the perpetual cloud cover before disappearing again. Elena understood why exile to remote outposts had been used as punishment throughout history. The environment itself became an accomplice in breaking down resistance. 6 months into her exile, Elena sat in her dingy apartment, staring at a stack of supply requisition forms that needed to be processed by morning. Outside, another storm was building, rattling her windows and sending sheets of rain against the glass. Her reflection looked back at her from the black window gaunt, tired, defeated dot. This was what they wanted. This was the endgame of their systematic destruction campaign. Not just to punish her for making them look incompetent, but to transform her into a cautionary tale for any other soldier who might consider challenging the established order. Elena Vasquez, the woman who had made an impossible shot to save 300 Marines, was supposed to disappear into this bureaucratic wasteland, emerging years later as a broken former soldier, grateful just to have avoided prison. Another successful example of the military's ability to process inconvenient truths into forgotten history. But as Elena sat in that cold apartment, listening to the storm outside, she realized they had made one critical miscalculation. They had spent months trying to erase her heroic act, but they had forgotten something fundamental about the woman who had performed it. Elena Vasquez didn't know how to quit. The same stubborn determination that had driven her through 13 sniper program rejections, the same relentless focus that had enabled an impossible 2,847-meter shot, was still burning inside her. They could take her rank, her career, her reputation, and her freedom, but they couldn't take away the fact that 300 Marines were alive, because she had refused to accept the word impossible. For the first time in months, Elena smiled. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of reminding them exactly what kind of woman they had chosen to make an enemy. The knock on Elena's apartment door came at 2,147 hours on a Tuesday night, when the Aleutian wind was howling like a wounded animal. She had been reviewing supply forms by lamplight, the only sound in her cramped apartment, the scratching of her pen, and the persistent rattle of windows under assault by the storm. In 6 months at Fort Bitterman, Elena had received exactly 0 social visits. The isolation protocol was too complete, the fear of association too strong. Through the peephole, she saw a young man in civilian clothes, who'd pulled up against the driving rain. He was shifting nervously from foot to foot, constantly checking over his shoulder as if expecting to be followed. Elena's hand moved instinctively to the service pistol she kept loaded beside her door, a habit from deployments that had never left her. "Who is it?" she called through the reinforced wood. "Lieutenant Wesley Chun, ma'am, Military Intelligence Division. I need to speak with you about Operation Scorching Eagle." Elena's blood went cold. Operation Scorching Eagle was the classified designation for the Khardistan rescue mission. No one was supposed to know that code name except the personnel directly involved, and most of them had been scattered, discharged, or silenced. The fact that this young officer knew it meant either he was part of the conspiracy to destroy her, or he had access to information that could be dangerous to both of them. She opened the door slowly, keeping the chain engaged. "Show me your identification." Lieutenant Chun held up his military ID with shaking hands. His photo matched his face, though he looked younger in person, maybe 25, with the earnest expression of someone who still believed the system worked the way it was supposed. 2. His service record was visible on the ID. Military intelligence, Fort Ravenwood, top secret clearance. Ma'am, I know this is irregular, but I've been investigating discrepancies in the Scorching Eagle after-action reports. What I found ... He glanced around the empty hallway nervously. What I found doesn't match the official narrative about your court-martial. Elena studied him through the crack in the door. Everything about this screamed setup. A young intelligence officer appearing at her door with classified information? It was either the most obvious trap in military history or the first break she'd had in 6 months of systematic destruction. How did you find my address? Intelligence training, ma'am. But also because someone needed to find you. Someone needed to know what really happened in those mountains. Against every instinct. Screaming at her to slam the door and call security, Elena unlatched the chain. If this was a setup, she was already finished anyway. If it wasn't, Lieutenant Chun might be the only person left in the military willing to seek the truth. Chun stepped inside, immediately scanning the apartment with the practiced eye of an intelligence operative. He noted the service weapon, the sparse furnishings, the stacks of meaningless paperwork that represented Elena's exile. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had discovered something that fundamentally challenged his worldview. Ma'am, I was assigned to routine intelligence analysis 3 months ago. My job was to review after-action reports for patterns and lessons learned. When I accessed the Scorching Eagle files, I found something that didn't make sense. Elena gestured. For him to sit at her small kitchen table, the only furniture in the apartment besides her military-issue cot. What kind of something? Chun pulled a tablet from his jacket, then seemed to think better of it and put it away. Ma'am, the ballistics analysis of your shot shows impact characteristics that are physically impossible according to the official timeline. Explain. The Taliban gunner was killed by a bullet traveling at 2,847 meters per second at impact. But according to the court-martial transcripts, you used an M24 rifle system. That weapon system, firing standard 7.62 NATO ammunition, loses velocity due to air resistance and gravity. At the distance recorded, 2,847 meters, the bullet should have been traveling approximately 1,200 meters per second at impact. Elena's mind raced. The young lieutenant was describing evidence that proved her shot was even more remarkable than anyone had realized. What's your conclusion? Either the distance measurements are wrong, or you used a different weapon system than what's in the official record. But here's the problem. I checked the ballistics database for every rifle system in the U.S. military inventory. None of them could have achieved that velocity at that distance. Chun leaned forward, his eyes intense with the conviction of someone who had stumbled onto a truth that others were desperately trying to hide. Ma'am, I think you made a shot that was technically impossible with the equipment you were supposed to have. And I think that's why they're trying to bury you. Elena stared at the young officer, her mind processing the implications. You're saying the evidence proves I succeeded beyond the parameters of what should have been possible. Yes, ma'am. And that level of capability, ... Chun paused, choosing his words carefully. That level of capability would be extremely valuable to certain interests. Interests that might want to study it, reverse engineer it, or control it. The pieces began falling into place. Elena's persecution wasn't just about military politics or wounded egos. It was about something much more valuable, a sniper capability that exceeded known human limits. If she could make impossible shots consistently, that ability was worth billions to defense contractors, foreign governments, or private military corporations. Lieutenant, what's your security clearance level? Top secret with special compartmented information access. But the Scorching Eagle files I accessed were classified at levels I shouldn't have been able to reach. Then how did you access them? Chun's face flushed slightly. Ma'am, I may have used some non-standard methods to cross-reference databases. When the system showed inconsistencies, I followed the data wherever it led. Elena almost smiled. The young officer had essentially hacked military intelligence databases because the official story didn't make mathematical sense. His dedication to truth over protocol reminded her of her younger self, the soldier who had applied 13 times for sniper training because she refused to accept no as a final answer. What did you find besides the ballistics analysis? Financial records, ma'am. 3 days after your court-martial, Apex Defense Systems received a $47 million contract for advanced marksmanship research. The contract was signed by the same Pentagon officials who testified at your hearing. The conspiracy was becoming clearer. Elena's impossible shot had demonstrated capabilities that the military-industrial complex wanted to monetize. But they couldn't study her abilities while she remained a celebrated hero with public attention. They needed her discredited, isolated, and desperate conditions under which she might be willing to cooperate in exchange for rehabilitation. Lieutenant Chun, why are you bringing this to me? You're risking your career, possibly your freedom. Chun met her gaze directly. Because I joined the military to serve the truth, ma'am. Not to participate in cover-ups that destroy heroes for corporate profit. And you think I'm a hero? Ma'am, I've studied the tactical situation in Khardistan. Terrain, weather conditions, equipment limitations, time pressure, everything was stacked against success. Yet you made a shot that saved 300 American servicemen. If that's not heroic, then the word has no meaning. Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in 6 months. Hope. Not just that someone believed her, but that someone with intelligence training and database access was willing to help her fight back. What do you propose we do with this information? Document everything, ma'am. Build an airtight case that proves your innocence and exposes the conspiracy. Then release it through channels that can't be suppressed or manipulated. That's a suicide mission for both of us. Chun nodded grimly. Yes, ma'am. But 300 Marines are alive because you were willing to risk everything for them. Maybe it's time someone was willing to risk everything for you. Elena studied the young lieutenant's face, seeing in his expression the same stubborn idealism that had driven her through years of rejection and months of systematic persecution. Chun reminded her that not everyone in the military had been corrupted by politics and profit. Some soldiers still believed in honor, truth, and justice, even when pursuing those values came at enormous personal cost. Lieutenant, if we do this, there's no going back. They'll come after you with everything they used against me, and probably worse. Understood, ma'am. But if we don't do this, they win. Your heroism gets erased. 300 Marines never get the recognition they deserve for surviving, and the next soldier who challenges the system gets destroyed even more efficiently. Elena extended her hand across the small table. All right, Lieutenant Chen, let's remind them what happens when they underestimate soldiers who refuse to quit. As they shook hands, Elena felt the familiar sensation she had experienced in the mountains of Khardistan, the moment when an impossible shot suddenly became inevitable. The system that had tried to destroy her was about to discover that Elena Vasquez had found something even more dangerous than her sniper skills. She had found an ally. The abandoned weather station on the northern edge of Fort Ravenwood had been out of service for 3 years, its equipment rusted by salt air, and its windows boarded against Aleutian storms. It was the perfect place for 2 soldiers to conduct an investigation that could destroy both their careers. Elena and Lieutenant Chun met there every Tuesday and Thursday at 2,100 hours, using the cover of Elena's evening walks to avoid surveillance. Chun had transformed the weather station's main room into a makeshift intelligence center. Military laptops connected to encrypted satellite uplinks allowed him to access databases that should have been far beyond his clearance level. Maps of Khardistan covered one wall, marked with trajectory calculations and wind pattern analyses. File folders containing printed documents were stacked on improvised tables made from old equipment crates. "The financial trail is deeper than I initially thought," Chun reported during their third meeting, his breath visible in the unheated building. "Apex Defense Systems isn't just a contractor. They're a front company for something much larger." Elena studied the corporate structure chart Chun had compiled. Shell companies nested within shell companies, ownership traced through a maze of offshore accounts and holding corporations. At the center of it all was a name that made her blood run cold: Meridian Strategic Solutions. "I know that company," Elena said quietly. "They tried to recruit me 2 years ago." Chun looked up sharply. "Recruit you for what?" "Private military contracting. Specifically, they wanted snipers for special projects in regions where the U.S. military couldn't operate officially. The pay was extraordinary, 3 times my military salary, but something about their representatives felt wrong. Maybe 48 hours before they transfer me out of Alaska. My orders are being expedited due to urgent personnel needs in Djibouti." Chun's laugh was bitter. "Apparently, the military has a sudden crisis requiring intelligence analysts. In the middle of the desert. Djibouti was where troublesome officers disappeared for months or years at a time, processing intelligence reports from isolated outposts while their security clearances gradually expired." Elena recognized the pattern, the same systematic isolation that had been used against her, now being deployed against her only ally. "We accelerate the timeline," Elena decided. "Contact Rebecca Morrison and David Kim today. If they still have copies of the original footage and documentation, we need it transferred immediately." Chun pulled up an encrypted communication app on his laptop. "Already tried. Morrison's phone goes straight to voicemail, and Kim's last known address in Bangkok shows no forwarding information. They've either gone completely dark or—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Elena understood the implications. Witnesses who possessed inconvenient evidence had a tendency to disappear or suffer unfortunate accidents when powerful interests were threatened. That evening, Elena discovered just how closely she was being watched. A routine visit to the base commissary revealed surveillance operatives positioned at every exit, their earpieces and coordinated movements marking them as professionals. When she stopped to tie her shoe, one agent immediately spoke into his wrist microphone. When she changed direction toward the pharmacy, another agent repositioned to maintain visual contact. The psychological pressure was expertly calibrated. They wanted her paranoid, constantly looking over her shoulder, unable to trust anyone or take any action without considering surveillance. It was the kind of pressure designed to break down judgment and force mistakes. Back in her apartment, Elena found evidence that her space had been searched. Nothing was missing, but items had been moved slightly, books repositioned, clothes refolded, papers shifted by millimeters. The searchers had been careful to leave subtle signs of their presence. Another calculated psychological tactic. Not her secure phone rang at 0347 hours, jarring her from uneasy sleep. The caller ID showed only numbers she didn't recognize. "Captain Vasquez?" The voice was electronically distorted, impossible to identify. "You've been asking dangerous questions." Elena sat up in bed, instantly alert. Who is this? Someone who knows what happens to soldiers who threaten the wrong people. Master Sergeant Thornton thought he was safe in civilian life. He was wrong. Elena's blood went cold. "What are you talking about?" "Check tomorrow's news from Seattle. Sometimes accidents happen to people who can't let sleeping dogs lie." The line went dead. Elena immediately tried calling Thornton's last known number, but it went straight to a disconnected message. Her attempts to reach him through mutual contacts yielded nothing. Everyone claimed they had lost touch after his medical discharge. The isolation protocol was complete. The next morning's news confirmed her worst fears. Master Sergeant Jake Thornton had been killed in a single-car accident on a rural highway outside Seattle. His vehicle had apparently skidded off the road during light rain, striking a tree at high speed. The investigating officer noted that Thornton had been drinking. Based on an empty whiskey bottle found in the car, Elena stared at the news report, rage building in her chest. Jake Thornton was a decorated combat veteran who had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan without a scratch. He was also a man who hadn't touched alcohol since losing a brother to drunk driving 10 years earlier. The idea that he would drive while intoxicated was absurd to anyone who knew him, but that was exactly why it was perfect, a story plausible enough for a news report, implausible enough to send a message to anyone else considering cooperation. With Elena's investigation, Chun received similar pressure through official channels. His commanding officer called him into a meeting, where the topic of conversation was career longevity and the importance of focusing on assigned duties rather than extracurricular activities. Captain Brewster made it very clear that my future promotions depend on demonstrating proper priorities, Chun reported during their final meeting at the weather station. Apparently, my database queries have been interpreted as insufficient focus on primary mission objectives. Elena packed their evidence files into waterproof containers, preparing for what she knew was coming. They're closing in. We need to execute the plan now, before they separate us completely. Elena, Chun said, using her first name for the first time, I need you to understand something. When we release this evidence, they won't just destroy our careers. They'll come after U.S. with everything: criminal charges, federal investigations, maybe worse. Thornton's death wasn't an accident. Elena met his gaze steadily. Lieutenant, 300 Marines are alive because I refuse to accept the word impossible. Jake Thornton is dead because he stood up for the truth. If we back down now, his death means nothing. Their plan was elegant in its simplicity. Chun had identified Senator Patricia Walsh, chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee, as someone with both the authority and integrity to handle their evidence properly. Walsh had built her career on military oversight and had a reputation for pursuing corruption, regardless of political consequences. But getting evidence to Walsh required careful coordination. Direct contact was impossible. Their communications were monitored, and official channels were compromised. They needed an intermediary who couldn't be easily identified or intimidated. Chun had found that intermediary in Dr. Sarah Lynch, a military psychiatrist who had testified before Walsh's committee about PTSD treatment failures. Lynch had clearance to travel between military installations and maintained contacts throughout the defense establishment. More importantly, her work with traumatized veterans had given her first-hand knowledge of how the military system could destroy good soldiers. Dr. Lynch agreed to carry our evidence package to Senator Walsh, Chun confirmed. She'll be at Fort Bitterman tomorrow for routine psychological evaluations. The transfer happens during her visit. Elena felt the familiar sensation of pieces falling into place, the same clarity that preceded an impossible shot. Everything depended on precise timing and flawless execution. That night, surveillance around Elena's apartment intensified. She counted 6 vehicles positioned around her building, with teams rotating every 4 hours. Motion sensors had been placed in the hallways, and her internet access was completely cut off. They were preparing for something, either her extraction or her elimination. Chun's situation was equally dire. Security personnel had searched his quarters twice in the past 24 hours, claiming routine inspections. His computer access had been restricted to basic administrative functions, and his movement around the base was being tracked through his security badge. They know we're close to something, Chun warned during a brief encounter near the commissary, speaking quietly while pretending to examine grocery items. My transfer orders came through this morning. I fly out at 0600 tomorrow. Elena nodded, understanding the timeline. They had less than 18 hours to complete the evidence transfer before Chun was removed from the equation entirely. After that, she would be completely isolated, with no allies and no way to prove what they had discovered. The final pieces of their investigation had revealed the full scope of what they were facing. Meridian Strategic Solutions was just one tentacle of a larger conspiracy involving defense contractors, Pentagon officials, and private military companies. The goal was systematic recruitment of elite military personnel for operations that existed outside official oversight assassinations. Industrial espionage, regime change activities that the United States government couldn't officially sanction. Elena's impossible shooting ability made her enormously valuable to such operations. Her persecution hadn't been punishment. It had been a recruitment tool designed to break her loyalty to traditional military service and make her available for more lucrative alternatives, but they had miscalculated her character. Instead of breaking her resolve, their systematic destruction had only strengthened her determination to expose them. Tomorrow, that determination would either vindicate her heroism or get both her and Chun killed. Elena checked her service pistol one final time, then settled in to wait for dawn. The impossible shot that had saved 300 Marines was about to become the foundation for a much more dangerous mission, one that would determine whether truth or power ultimately prevailed in the corridors of American military leadership. The clock was ticking, and Elena Vasquez had never missed a shot that mattered. Dr. Sarah Lynch arrived at Fort Bitterman at 0830 hours for what the official schedule listed as routine psychological evaluations for isolated personnel. Elena watched from her office window as Lynch's military transport landed on the base's single runway, its engines cutting through the perpetual Aleutian wind. This was their last chance. In 4 hours, Chun would be on a plane to Djibouti, and Elena would be completely alone against a conspiracy that had already killed to protect itself. The evidence transfer had to happen during Lynch's evaluation sessions, when Elena would have legitimate reason to be in the medical building. Chun had programmed everything onto 3 separate encrypted drives: financial records, communication logs, video footage, witness statements, and tactical analyses that proved Elena's innocence while exposing the conspiracy. The drives were hidden in a medical supply shipment that Lynch would carry back to Washington, a nearly perfect plan that depended on split-second timing and flawless execution. Elena reported to the medical building at 10:30 hours for her mandatory quarterly psychological evaluation, part of the monitoring protocol for personnel stationed at remote installations. The hallways buzzed with more activity than usual. Too many security personnel for a routine day. Too many unfamiliar faces wearing civilian clothes that didn't quite hide their government credentials. First Lieutenant Vasquez, Dr. Lynch greeted her with professional warmth, gesturing toward her temporary office. "Please, have a seat. I understand you've been at Fort Bitterman for 6 months now. How are you adjusting to the isolation?" Elena sat in the offered chair, acutely aware that their conversation was likely being recorded. Lynch looked exactly as Chen had described: mid-40s, graying hair, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. More importantly, she had the bearing of someone who had seen enough military corruption to be outraged rather than surprised by their evidence. "The adjustment has been challenging, ma'am," Elena replied carefully. "But I've learned that sometimes isolation provides clarity about what really matters." Lynch nodded, making notes on her tablet. "Clarity can be valuable, especially when dealing with complex situations. Speaking of complexity, I understand you've been processing supply requisitions. That must be quite different from your previous duties." Elena recognized the code phrase Chun had arranged. "Yes, ma'am. The logistics work has given me perspective on how many moving parts are required for military operations. It's amazing how much happens behind the scenes that most people never see. Indeed, the support structures that make missions possible are often invisible to those focused on tactical objectives. Lynch's eyes met Elena's directly. I imagine someone with your background notices inefficiencies and irregularities that others might miss. Ma'am, I've noticed several discrepancies in supply chain documentation that suggest systematic problems beyond routine administrative errors. Lynch leaned forward slightly. That sounds concerning. Have you documented these discrepancies? Elena nodded, then glanced meaningfully toward Lynch's medical bag. I've compiled comprehensive records, ma'am. The patterns suggest coordination between multiple departments and external contractors. Lynch understood immediately. She opened her medical bag and removed a blood pressure cuff, then positioned herself to block security camera angles while Elena quickly transferred the 3 encrypted drives into Lynch's equipment case. I think what you need, Lynch said loudly enough for any listening devices, is a change in medication to help with stress management. I'm going to prescribe something that should provide significant relief. Elena felt a weight lift from her shoulders as the evidence disappeared into Lynch's bag. Thank you, ma'am. I'm confident that prescription will solve my problems completely. Their session continued for another 20 minutes, maintaining the fiction of routine psychological evaluation while Lynch gathered additional details about Elena's situation. When it ended, Elena walked back to her office knowing that either the truth would finally emerge, or she had just signed both their death warrants. Chun's departure was scheduled for 1400 hours, but at 12:30, base alarms began wailing. Elena looked up from her paperwork to see military police vehicles racing toward the Intelligence Division building. Through her window, she watched as Chun was escorted from the building in handcuffs, his uniform stripped of rank insignia. Elena's secure phone buzzed with a text message. Lieutenant Chun has been arrested for espionage. Report to Building A immediately for questioning. The net was closing faster than they had anticipated. Elena grabbed her service weapon and the backup evidence files she had hidden in her desk, then made a decision that would either save her life or end it. Instead of reporting for questioning, she walked calmly to the vehicle maintenance building where she had prepared an emergency escape route. The maintenance building's rear exit led to a service road used for equipment transport. Elena had studied the surveillance patterns for weeks and knew there was a 12-minute gap between security patrols. She slipped out during that window, making her way to the civilian section of the island where a fishing boat waited at the pile. Harbor Captain Murphy, a grizzled veteran who had served 3 tours in Vietnam before becoming a commercial fisherman, had agreed to provide transportation in exchange for Elena's entire savings account. Murphy asked no questions and demanded no explanations. He simply understood that sometimes good soldiers needed help escaping bad situations. Weather's going to be rough, Murphy warned as Elena climbed aboard his vessel. But it'll provide cover from any aircraft trying to track us. As they pulled away from Fort Bitterman's harbor, Elena saw military vehicles converging on her apartment building. Searchlights swept the base perimeter, and she could hear helicopters starting up in the distance. They had discovered her absence. Faster than expected, but not fast enough to prevent her escape. Murphy's boat cut through increasingly rough seas toward the Alaskan mainland. Elena huddled in the cabin, monitoring military communication frequencies on a portable radio. The chatter confirmed her worst fears. Chun had been charged with treason and was being transferred to a maximum security facility. Dr. Lynch's transport had been delayed due to mechanical issues, meaning they were searching her baggage and equipment. Your friend's in trouble, Murphy observed, overhearing the radio traffic. They're calling this the biggest security breach since Bradley Manning. Elena knew the comparison was deliberate. Manning had exposed military misconduct and spent years in prison before eventually being pardoned. The message was clear. Chun faced decades of imprisonment unless Elena surrendered herself and accepted whatever deal they offered. The boat's radio crackled with an official announcement. This is Fort Bitterman Command. First Lieutenant Elena Vasquez is wanted for questioning in connection with espionage charges. She is considered armed and dangerous. Any assistance provided to Lieutenant Vasquez constitutes aid to a fugitive and will be prosecuted to the full extent of military and civilian law. Murphy looked at Elena with raised eyebrows. Armed and dangerous? Only to people who deserve it, Elena replied grimly. As they reached the Alaskan mainland, Elena's phone rang with a call from an encrypted number she didn't recognize. Against her better judgment, she answered. Lieutenant Vasquez, came the electronically distorted voice she had heard before. You've made a serious mistake. I've made the only choice available to someone who refuses to be silenced. Your evidence package has been intercepted. Dr. Lynch is being questioned about her role in your espionage activities. Lieutenant Chun is facing life imprisonment for treason. Was exposing us worth destroying everyone who tried to help you? Elena felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. Chun and Lynch had risked everything to help her seek justice. And now they were paying the price for her decision to fight back. What do you want? She asked. Surrender yourself at the federal building in Anchorage by 1800 hours. Confess to espionage charges and accept responsibility for corrupting the others. In exchange, Chun will be transferred to minimum security and eventually released. Dr. Lynch will face administrative punishment rather than criminal charges. Elena looked at her watch. She had 6 hours to decide between saving her allies and continuing her fight for justice. 6 hours to choose between personal integrity and the lives of people who had believed in her cause. And if I refuse? Then Shen dies in federal prison, Lynch loses her medical license and faces federal conspiracy charges, and you become the most wanted fugitive in North America. We have resources you can't imagine, Lieutenant. You can run, but you cannot hide indefinitely. The line went dead, leaving Elena staring at the Alaskan coastline through salt-stained windows. Behind her lay Fort Bitterman and the evidence of her persecution. Ahead lay either surrender or a life spent looking over her shoulder while her allies paid the price for her choices. Captain Murphy studied her carefully. You know, in Vietnam, I learned something about impossible situations. Sometimes the only way out is straight through the middle. Elena looked at the grizzled fisherman. What do you mean? I mean sometimes when they're hunting you, the last thing they expect is for you to hunt them back. You got any friends left in this fight? Elena thought about Senator Walsh, about the evidence that might have reached her despite the interception, about the 300 Marines whose lives she had saved and who might still remember what really happened in those mountains. Maybe, she said. Slowly, but getting to them means going straight into enemy territory. Murphy smiled grimly. Well, Lieutenant, looks like you're going to find out what kind of soldier you really are. As they approached the Anchorage harbor, Elena realized she faced the same kind of impossible shot she had made in Khardistan. One chance to hit a target that everyone said couldn't be reached, with everything depending on perfect precision. And unwavering courage. The difference was that this time, missing meant more than mission failure. This time, missing meant the truth would be buried forever, and the people who had believed in her would pay with their freedom or their lives. Elena Vasquez checked her weapon one final time and prepared to take the most important shot of her career. The federal building in Anchorage buzzed with unusual activity at 17:30 hours. News vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes extended toward gray Alaskan skies. Senator Patricia Walsh had called an emergency press conference for 1800 hours, the exact time Elena was supposed to surrender herself to federal authorities. The timing was not coincidental. Elena watched the scene unfold from the roof of a parking garage 3 blocks away, using binoculars to study the tactical situation. Federal agents had established a perimeter around the building, expecting her to walk through the front doors as demanded. What they hadn't anticipated was Senator Walsh's decision to hold a public press conference about military oversight failures, or Elena's plan to attend that conference as an uninvited guest, Dr. Lynch, had succeeded in her mission despite the search of her equipment. The encrypted drives had been hidden inside medical devices that appeared normal to cursory inspection but contained specialized compartments designed by Chun's intelligence training. Walsh had received the evidence 6 hours earlier and immediately convened an emergency session of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Elena's secure phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Building surrounded. Surrender now or your friends face maximum penalties. She responded, check the news in 30 minutes. The press conference was scheduled to begin in the building's main auditorium, a large room with multiple entrances that would be impossible to seal completely. Elena had studied the architectural plans during her time at Fort Bitterman, memorizing every corridor, stairwell, and service entrance. Her escape route was already planned the same methodical preparation that had enabled her impossible shot in Khardistan. Moving through Anchorage's downtown district, Elena used techniques learned in urban warfare training to avoid surveillance cameras and federal agents. Her military uniform had been replaced with civilian clothes, purchased during a brief stop in town. But she carried her service weapon and the backup evidence files that could corroborate everything Chun had compiled. At 1755 hours, Elena entered the federal building through a service entrance used by catering staff preparing for the press conference. Her military bearing and confident manner convinced security personnel that she belonged there, one of thousands of psychological tactics that special operations had taught her. The auditorium was packed with journalists, congressional staff, members, and federal officials who had been summoned on short notice. Elena positioned herself in the back corner, behind a pillar that provided cover while offering clear sight lines to the podium. She recognized several faces from her investigation. Marcus Vale sat in the front row, his expensive suit and calm demeanor marking him as someone confident that this situation was under control. Senator Walsh approached the podium at exactly 1800 hours, her expression grim with the weight of what she was about to reveal. The room fell silent as she adjusted the microphone and looked directly into the television cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, I've called this emergency press conference to address serious allegations of corruption within our military leadership and defense contracting system. Evidence received today indicates systematic conspiracy to manipulate personnel assignments, falsify mission reports, and profit from the exploitation of American service members. Murmurs rippled through the audience as journalists began checking their phones and tablets for breaking news alerts. Elena watched Marcus Vale's face carefully. His confident expression was beginning to show cracks of concern. Specifically, Walsh continued, we have documented evidence that certain Pentagon officials have coordinated with private military contractors to identify and recruit elite personnel through systematic harassment and career destruction. The goal was to make these service members desperate enough to accept lucrative private sector positions. The room erupted as reporters began shouting questions. Elena saw federal agents near the exit speaking urgently into their communication devices, clearly receiving new instructions from superiors who were watching the press conference unfold. Walsh raised her hand for silence. The case I'm presenting today involves First Lieutenant Elena Vasquez, whose heroic rescue of 300 Marines in Khardistan was systematically covered up to facilitate her recruitment by private interests. Elena felt every eye in the room searching for her as Walsh continued. Lieutenant Vasquez made what ballistics experts confirm was an impossible shot under combat conditions, saving American lives through extraordinary skill and courage. Instead of being celebrated, she was court-martialed on fabricated charges and exiled to a remote installation. Marcus Vale was now speaking urgently into his phone, his calm facade completely abandoned. Other officials throughout the audience were similarly engaged in damage control communications, their coordinated panic confirming everything Elena and Chun had discovered. The financial trail documented in our evidence shows that General Harrison Caldwell received significant compensation from Apex Defense Systems for facilitating personnel transfers. Colonel Marcus Brewster approved fraudulent medical discharges to eliminate witnesses. Deputy Secretary Morrison authorized classified information sales to private contractors. As Walsh spoke, Elena noticed federal agents moving through the audience, apparently searching for her. Their movements were coordinated and systematic, but they were looking for someone trying to hide rather than someone standing confidently in plain sight. Furthermore, Walsh announced, we have video evidence of Lieutenant Vasquez's heroic actions in Khardistan, footage that was deliberately suppressed during her court-martial proceedings. The large screens flanking the podium illuminated with the video. Chun had recovered footage of Elena making her impossible shot, the rescue helicopters extracting 300 Marines, and the celebration that followed. Elena watched herself on screen, remembered the moment when everything had seemed possible. Before the conspiracy destroyed her career, the audience watched in stunned silence as the video played. When it ended, Walsh looked directly into the cameras. This is what heroism looks like, and this is what our military leadership tried to destroy for corporate profit. A reporter in the front row stood up. Senator Walsh, where is Lieutenant Vasquez now? We understand she's wanted by federal authorities on espionage charges. Lieutenant Vasquez is wanted by the same officials who orchestrated her persecution, Walsh replied firmly. The espionage charges are part of the same systematic campaign to silence her testimony. Elena knew this was her moment. She stepped out from behind the pillar and walked calmly toward the front of the auditorium, her military bearing drawing every eye in the room. Cameras swung toward her as she approached the podium, and the room fell silent except for the clicking of camera shutters. Senator Walsh, Elena said clearly, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium. I'm Elena Vasquez, and I'm here to tell the truth. Federal agents throughout the room began moving toward her, but stopped when Walsh gestured for them to wait. The press conference had become a live television event broadcast nationwide. Any attempt to arrest Elena now would be witnessed by millions of viewers. Lieutenant Vasquez, Walsh said, please tell the American people what really happened in Khardistan. Elena looked out at the audience, seeing Marcus Vale's face pale with the realization that his carefully constructed conspiracy was collapsing in real time. She thought of Chun, sitting in a federal detention facility because he had believed in justice. She thought of Dr. Lynch facing criminal charges for helping expose the truth. She thought of Master Sergeant Thornton, killed for refusing to stay silent. On September 15th, Elena began. I made a 2,847-meter shot in mountain conditions to save 300 American Marines from certain death. Instead of being honored for that action, I was systematically destroyed by officials who wanted to recruit me for private military operations, outside government oversight. She pulled out her backup evidence files and held them up for the cameras. These documents prove that my court-martial was orchestrated by the same Pentagon officials who later received millions in defense contracts. They prove that witnesses were silenced, evidence was fabricated, and American heroes were sacrificed for corporate profits. The room erupted as journalists began shouting questions and federal agents received conflicting orders through their earpieces. Elena noticed that several officials who had been present at the beginning of the press conference were now conspicuously absent, apparently deciding that distance from the unfolding scandal was more important than damage control. The question America needs to ask, Elena concluded, is whether we're going to allow corporate interests to corrupt our military leadership and destroy the careers of soldiers who refuse to be bought. Walsh stepped back to the microphone. Based on the evidence presented, I'm calling for immediate congressional hearings into these allegations. Furthermore, I'm requesting that the Department of Justice launch a full investigation into the officials named in these documents. As the press conference continued with questions and answers, Elena noticed that the federal agents who had been positioning to arrest her were now standing back, apparently receiving orders to wait. The public nature of the revelation had changed the political calculus. Arresting the whistleblower on live television would only validate her accusations. Marcus Vale had disappeared from the front row, along with several other officials whose faces Elena recognized from their investigation. The rats were abandoning the ship, leaving lower-level personnel to face the consequences of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. Elena remained at the podium as questions continued, answering each one with the precision and clarity that had characterized her sniper training. Every response was calculated to provide maximum information while maintaining the tactical advantage she had gained by appearing publicly. The impossible shot that had saved 300 Marines in Khardistan had become the foundation for an even more important victory, the exposure of a conspiracy that threatened the integrity of American military service itself. For the first time in months, Elena Vasquez smiled with genuine satisfaction. The truth was finally free, and no amount of money or political influence could put it back in the box. 18 months after her public revelation in Anchorage, Colonel Elena Vasquez stood before the graduating class of the United States Military Academy at West Point. The same woman who had been exiled to process toilet paper requisitions in Alaska now wore the eagles of a full colonel, her chest displaying not only the Medal of Valor that had been restored to her, but also the Congressional Gold Medal for exposing corruption within the defense establishment. The transformation had been swift and thorough. Within 48 hours of the press conference, federal investigators had arrested 12 officials on charges ranging from conspiracy to fraud to accessory to murder in Master Sergeant Thornton's death. Marcus Vale had been found in a luxury hotel in Dubai, attempting to negotiate asylum with foreign governments before being extradited to face treason charges. General Harrison Caldwell, the man who had blocked Elena's sniper applications 13 times, now resided in federal prison, serving a 20-year sentence for conspiracy and racketeering. His entire career, 3 decades of what appeared to be distinguished service, had been revealed as a file, systematic operation to identify and exploit military talent for private profit. "The oath you swear today," Elena told the assembled cadets, her voice carrying across the parade ground where America's future military leaders sat in perfect formation, "is not to individuals or institutions, but to principles that transcend any single person's career or ambition." In the audience, Lieutenant Colonel Wesley Chun sat in the front row, his own career not only restored, but accelerated due to his crucial role in exposing the conspiracy. His intelligence analysis had provided the framework that made prosecution possible, earning him a position as the youngest division chief in military intelligence history. Dr. Sarah Lynch occupied a seat of honor on the platform, her courage in carrying evidence to Senator Walsh having transformed her from a routine military psychiatrist into the Pentagon's new Inspector General for Personnel Ethics. Her mandate was simple: ensure that no soldier would ever again face systematic persecution for refusing to compromise their integrity. The investigation that followed, Elena's public revelation, had uncovered a conspiracy far more extensive than even she and Chun had imagined. Meridian Strategic Solutions was revealed to be one of 17 private military corporations involved in systematic talent poaching from active duty military. The scheme had been operating for over a decade, resulting in the forced retirement or persecution of more than 200 elite soldiers, whose only crime had been possessing skills too valuable for private interests to ignore. "Your greatest enemy," Elena continued, "will not be foreign adversaries or battlefield challenges. It will be the temptation to compromise your values for expedience, to choose silence over courage, to accept injustice because fighting it seems impossible." The court proceedings had been spectacular in their scope and consequence. Senator Walsh's committee had uncovered financial trails leading to defense contractors across multiple countries, revealing that American military personnel were being systematically identified and recruited for operations that violated international law. The hearings had been broadcast live, providing the American people with an unprecedented look at how corporate interests had infiltrated military leadership. Elena's own testimony had lasted 3 days, walking senators through every detail of her persecution from the first sniper program rejection through her exile in Alaska. Her precision and clarity, the same qualities that had enabled her impossible shot in Khardistan, made her an unshakable witness whose credibility even defense attorneys couldn't challenge. The 300 Marines Elena had saved in Khardistan had finally been allowed to testify about what they had witnessed. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, now a sergeant major, had traveled from his current assignment in Germany specifically to thank Elena publicly and described the moment when her impossible shot had given them hope in what seemed like a hopeless situation. "We knew we were dead," Rodriguez had testified before the Senate committee. "The Taliban had us zeroed and extraction was impossible. Then we heard that shot, saw that gunner drop, and suddenly the helicopters could reach us. Every one of us owes our lives to Colonel Vasquez's courage and skill." The institutional changes following the scandal had been comprehensive. New oversight protocols required multiple approvals for personnel transfers, independent review of court-martial proceedings, and mandatory congressional notification when elite personnel faced disciplinary action. The Pentagon had established an Office of Military Personnel Protection, specifically to investigate claims of systematic harassment or persecution. Defense Secretary Catherine Morrison, no relation to the corrupt official who had been imprisoned, had personally apologized to Elena during a ceremony restoring her to active duty. "The United States military failed you, Colonel Vasquez," Morrison had stated. "We allowed politics and greed to override our most fundamental obligation, protecting those who serve with honor." Elena's new assignment reflected both her vindication and her proven leadership capabilities. As Director of Elite Personnel Development, she oversaw training programs for the military's most capable soldiers while ensuring that talent identification served national interests rather than private profit. Her first initiative had been the elimination of subjective barriers that had previously excluded qualified candidates from advanced training. Barriers that had once kept her from sniper school for 7 years. The personal cost of her victory had been substantial. Elena's faith in military institutions had been permanently altered by her experience of systematic betrayal. She understood now that courage meant constant vigilance against the corruption that could infect any organization when principles became subordinate to politics. But there had been unexpected rewards as well. Elena's story had inspired a new generation of military personnel to speak up against injustice rather than accept it as inevitable. The Vasquez Protocol had become military slang for refusing to compromise integrity regardless of personal consequences, and young soldiers routinely cited her example when facing pressure to remain silent about wrongdoing. 27 years ago, Elena continued her address to the cadets. "I enlisted in the United States Army because I believed in serving something greater than myself. That belief was tested, challenged, and nearly destroyed by people who forgot that our oath is to principles, not profit." She paused, looking out at the young faces before her, men and women who would soon face their own tests of integrity and courage. "The shot I made in Khardistan saved 300 American lives. But the shot that really mattered was the decision to fight back when powerful people tried to destroy me for refusing to be bought. That's the shot every soldier must be prepared to take, the willingness to stand for truth even when the odds seem impossible." In the audience, families of the graduating cadets listened intently. Many had followed Elena's story through the media coverage of the trials and congressional hearings. She had become more than a military hero. She was proof that individuals could still challenge institutional corruption and win. The ceremony concluded with Elena administering the oath of office to the new second lieutenants. As each young officer repeated the words that bound them to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, Elena reflected on how that oath had ultimately guided her through her darkest moments. After the ceremony, Elena walked alone across the West Point grounds, past monuments to military heroes who had faced their own moments of testing. Her phone buzzed with messages from soldiers around the world who had heard her speech and wanted to share their own stories of choosing integrity over expedience. One message caught her attention from Captain Sarah Kim, the officer who had been passed over for promotion after supporting Elena's original sniper applications. Kim had not only received her delayed promotion, but had been selected to command an elite reconnaissance unit. "Colonel," Kim's message read, "watching your speech reminded me why I joined the military. Thank you for showing us that impossible shots can be made when everything depends on them." Elena smiled, understanding that her true legacy wasn't the 2,847-meter shot that had saved 300 Marines in Khardistan. It was the knowledge that principled soldiers could still fight institutional corruption and win, that truth could still overcome power when courage was combined with precision and preparation. Standing on the grounds where America's military leaders were shaped, Elena Vasquez knew that her most important mission was just beginning. Training the next generation of soldiers to recognize the difference between serving their country and serving those who would exploit it for profit. The impossible shot had been just the beginning. The real target was ensuring that integrity remained at the heart of American military service, one soldier at a time. As the sun set over the Hudson River, Elena walked toward her quarters, ready for whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. She had learned that some battles could only be won by those willing to take impossible shots when everything that mattered hung in the balance, and Elena Vasquez had never missed a shot that truly counted. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.